What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Sports Weekly Podcast, where we talk everything Iowa State. I'm your host, Christian Royston, joined by my co-host, Logan Shanks. We'll start by recapping the Texas game, move into some, end-of-season stuff with football now, and then talk about a little bit of basketball. So, first of all, from that Texas game, honestly, not a bad loss in my mind. What did we kind of see from that, though?
Yeah, it was another game kind of like the Kansas game where the offense didn't really come alive until that second half, and it was just a little too late. And what sucked was that really the defense did really good against Texas. Texas kind of shot themselves in the foot a couple times in that first half with penalties and whatnot, and Iowa State's defense was really solid in that first half, but whatever it was, Texas just figured things out in that second half and ultimately just outplayed Iowa State offensively, and you knew that was going to happen, especially with the amount of talent that Texas has.
Yeah, I don't think you could kind of keep Texas off the scoreboard for that long. 6 points was probably less than we expected from Texas in the first half, and then Texas started just kind of looking like Texas there. I think the biggest thing for me was maybe just the lack of run game. I think we knew it was going to be an issue going into this, especially with how big Texas is. I mean, you have like a guy in the middle there who's over 300 pounds. But less than 10 yards total was a little bit surprising to me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and especially you have they tried everyone like they've normally been trying to do. They tried putting Abu out there, Cartavius and Eli, and just whatever it was could not work. I think the offensive line was just kind of the ultimate detriment to the run game. I think it was just another game where, like you said, they have a great defensive front and kind of got to them early on. And they, I agree with always trying to, develop a run game early on. But I think the problem with Iowa State is they're just a little too late to figure out when to stop going to the run. And I think when they trusted Rocco later in the game, that worked out. I know Rocco throws that pick in the first half and then they end up scoring, but ultimately we're sitting here in the same chair saying that Rocco Becht had a pretty solid game, but ultimately it's that run game that you just can't get it going. And yeah, you hold Texas to 6 points in that first half, but then just ultimately the offense is just not enough in the second half to keep up with them.
And I think the last thing with the run game was maybe just the stubbornness to keep going at it, because I think once you're into that second half, you see that you've only put up 5 rushing yards. And then that third quarter, you're still not able to run the ball at all. And it almost looks like it's worse than it was in the first half. But yet they keep going back to the ground, especially with how Rocco Becht was playing. And he was finding his receivers. He was making plays just consistently. I think you kind of want to see them move away from the run game at times. Obviously sprinkling a few rushes here and there, but it seemed like they were just kind of throwing away downs just consistently.
And those runs, they're usually always going up the middle. There's no really variety. You've seen it throughout the whole season. Very rarely do you see blocking set up for the outside. Usually when someone, whether it's Abu or Eli, takes it to the outside, it's because they're forced to do it because of bad blocking. And something that I'd really like to see maybe, in these last 2 games with the regular season and the bowl game, and then, kind of going in next year, is that they just become more, they put up more interesting or diversify the run game, with the blocking and whatnot.
Yeah, it would be nice to see just a little bit of, variety. Not even in just the run game, but just play calling in general. We've seen it throughout the season at times. I liked when Jalen Noel threw that pass to Jaden Higgins, or, they go for the fake field goal there against Cincinnati, but you kind of want to see them pull out one of those trick plays against a team like Texas if they really want to compete with the top teams in the Big 12.
And I think they're going to do that, especially in this last game against Kansas State, and we'll talk more about it later, but the opportunity that you have here with Kansas State is that you're not expected to win. It's a lot like the Texas game. You've already got your spot to be bowl eligible, but that 7th win going into a bowl game just looks a lot better, especially if you lose that bowl game. A 7-win season when many were projecting you to finish bottom of the Big 12. I think Iowa State, they're at a spot right now where they can't just give up because they have a bowl game, and we've kind of gotten that vibes from the players is that, you yeah, we got this milestone, but they still have a lot more to work for. And you kind of talked about it with Rocco Becht. He really, and you talked about it with me after the game, he honestly had a better game than Quinn Ewers. I mean, even in that first half, he was kind of outplaying him a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And I think we can talk more about Rocco. He actually set the freshman record for passing touchdowns, which Brock had previously. Mm-hmm. So I think he's obviously following in really good footsteps there. And he had another just lights out performance. I mean, he throws that one pick, which leads to points, but he also does he does more good than he does bad. Mm-hmm. It's what it seems like. It seems like he'll maybe have hiccups every once in a while, like he'll throw that pick, but then he'll come back, and he did, and just had a touchdown drive too. It seems like if he has, I mean, this is what Campbell was saying too, if he has a bad play or a bad day of practice, he's going to come back and just make up for it.
The pick seemed a little on schedule, especially for Rocco. I mean, you kind of felt like, at some point he had a really great game against BYU, and then you just got to think, especially against a team like Texas, he's probably going to turn the ball over at least once, and he did with that. And I think when you go back and look at it, it was more just him trying to make a play that wasn't there. I mean, there's 2, maybe even 3 guys in there, and he kind of reads Jalen's route late. And he kind of talked about in the postgame that he was really looking at Bramer's route at first. And then I think his eyes just caught on to Jalen Knoll. And a lot of quarterbacks have that where you never want to let a play die. And I don't think that's a bad mentality to have, but especially in a close game like that. And then, like you said, just leads to points. That obviously hurts. But besides that, yeah, he played a great game, completed 24 of his 32 passes and over 300 yards. I think that was the second most yards that he's had all year. So, yeah, really, you're seeing Rocco get a lot better, and especially it helps going late into the year as well.
Yeah, and you talk more about the pick that he threw. I think I especially was like just up in the press box, just going like, oh wow, he is all the time in the world. He's definitely gonna find something, and then just right to the other team, which a little disappointing, especially where they were at on the field. But it's just another one of those things. He's had this throughout the season where he just miscommunication, just not reading stuff right. But I mean, that's stuff that'll clean up as he plays.
Yeah, and when next year hopefully if he comes back next year, which I think he's going to, I think you're going to see a lot better Rocco Becht from where he was at. You're already seeing a lot better of him from where he was at the beginning of the year to where he's at now. And especially I think on that deep ball, I think he's gotten better with the deep ball, but more on those medium routes as well, where, you have guys like Jaden Higgins and Jalen Knoll who can really take those balls anywhere when they have space to. So overall, yeah, Rocco is just showing why he got the starting job. And honestly, for me, it kind of seems silly that it was a debate whether it was going to be him, J.J. Cole, or Tanner Hughes out there.
Yeah, I was kind of in the boat of I didn't really see much from Rocco in the last season, and I wasn't ready to put my full trust in him, but he proved me wrong. Especially, I think it was the Oklahoma State game where I was like, okay, yeah, this guy's definitely the starter. And I think it also kind of brings up, now that he's being compared to Brock Purdy with this freshman passing touchdown record, what are the chances that Rocco Becht is the next Brock Purdy?
I think it would be very I think the chances are small. I think this is kind of a bad comparison, but it's kind of like when you go from Bart Starr to Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers. You have Brock Purdy, who is the best quarterback that Iowa State's ever had, possibly one of the best players that they've ever had, and then to just pass the torch on, after one season, but to Rocco. I think after this, I need to see a little bit more, but I'm sure that's what people are saying when Brock Purdy, when his freshman year came around. And, the stats are a little skewed because Brock didn't start until I think it was week 4 or 5 of his freshman year. But, you've seen it out of Rocco. He's just been really great. Like I said, especially down this stretch, I think he's going to get to 20 touchdowns this year. And if he can get 20 passing touchdowns as a freshman, I think he's got 3 on the ground right now. And what I'd really like to see for him is in these next 2 games, he's at 7 or 8 interceptions on the year. If he can get below 10 interceptions as a freshman and you lead your team to possibly a win over the bowl game, I think the sky is ultimately the limit for him. And maybe he will be the next Brock Purdy. I'm not willing to put my stamp of approval on that yet, but I think he has the possibility of being someone, that Iowa State, he leaves a legacy behind when he is done at Iowa State.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in the same boat of I haven't seen enough yet to put him up in like that category with like Brock, but at this point, he has been surprisingly good, and I think he has the chance to lead this team for as long as he wants to if he just keeps improving and keeps playing with this same skill level. I think the biggest thing is I just kind of want to see more of what he can do, because I know it's a very different circumstance of how he took over the team as when Brock took over the team, and they are different players. I mean, they're both efficient with the ball, but they have different skill sets, and that's like very clear.
Yeah.
So I think he might be able to butt into an elite Iowa State quarterback himself, but yeah. At this point, I'm not going to put him up there with Brock Purdy yet. I think it's just an interesting comparison, though.
It is an interesting comparison. And also, looking at him right now, he has 8 interceptions on the year. So, again, if he can keep that under 10 interceptions as a freshman, I think would be awesome for him. And he's at 17 passing touchdowns. So, if he can get over 20, again, that'd be great. But I think where a lot of people haven't really thought about this is there's been a lot of games where he's been trusted to be the sole playmaker, especially with how much we've talked about the run game doesn't work. It doesn't work early on. He doesn't get up. I mean, really, there's been a lot. I'd like to see what his stats are in the second half, especially with passing yards, because you look at it right now, he has two games over 300 yards, and he's consistently hitting that like 220, 230 passing yards mark, with a run game that has not always been there. You've had a couple games where they've gotten over 100, the BYU game where they rushed for over 200, but I think you have to give a lot of credit to Rocco Becht for stepping up in this offense, not even just as a starter, but as a pretty good starter for an offense that has relied a lot on the passing game and a young quarterback.
And you look at the passing game, I think one of the biggest pieces that we saw during the Texas game that I think we've kind of seen just take off has been Jaden Higgins, who this season has kind of unexpectedly become like the star wide receiver on the team. Like, I think Jalen Knoll is like a great receiver.
Yeah.
But it does seem like Jaden Higgins is like the top guy at this point.
And it
especially with another 100-yard game.
Yeah, and it's good to see because Jaden's going to be back next year. I forget, is he a junior? Is he a senior? I want to say Knoll is a junior and he will be back next year. Or maybe finds a way, maybe it takes a COVID year or whatever. It seems like college athletes kind of find their way to finagle their way into an extra year or whatnot. But no, Higgins has been awesome. Someone that kind of, exactly what you said, kind of flew under the radar heading into the season. And he's been consistent, especially, just a 7 against Texas, 7 catches for over 100 yards. And I think got to give credit to Rocco for finding him consistently, especially with Texas's big guys up front. But no, I want to say Jaden's probably close to hitting that like 800-yard mark. He might have actually already hit it. Looking at it right now, he's at 714 yards on 42 catches. I mean, that's awesome there. You're averaging 17 yards a catch. And, yeah, you really hit it right there. He's been awesome for this offense that was kind of needing that wide receiver 1 role after X left last year.
Yeah, he's been kind of like sneaky good. I know after the Texas game, I was looking at the stats. I didn't kept up with the receiving yards. I was more focused on the 9 rushing yards, and that was kind of the big story of the day was, wow, this run game is not doing well. But then I looked at Higgins, and I did remember his big catch that he had during the game, but I also didn't realize that he had put up over 100, which, only the second game this year that he's done that.
Right. And I just look right here. So Jalen Knoll, he is a junior. So you'll have both of them back next year. I think them in that 1-2 spot. And then if you can find someone at the 3 spot, like Ben, I think it's Nagoyi, is someone that has been hyped up a lot. He's seen some time this year. I wouldn't go as far as to say that he can automatically slide into that wide receiver 3 role, but he very much could. I mean, he's definitely been someone that a lot of people have, had their eyes on. And let's just not even we can't forget about Benjamin Bramer. I mess it up every time. Bramer. I did say it right that first time, but he's awesome. He is a tight end / wide receiver in my book. And they were asking at media after the game that kind of like slip screen to Bramer has been awesome, and it's worked a couple times. that has worked out for big gains. And yeah, I think, the bright future ahead for Iowa State offensively, at least in, the passing game. And I think Jaden Higgins is the guy leading the charge for them.
Mm-hmm. Especially if the run game continues to maybe not like be an issue, but just show like signs of growth. Like there's been games where they've been really good, but this is a game where it definitely looked like they were a young group against a like very good Texas defensive line. So I think if going forward, I mean, it's a super young running back room too. I mean, your oldest player's a redshirt freshman. Or sophomore with Eli Sanders.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, those guys have like 2-3 years left amongst everyone. So, I mean, if that room is still growing, it shows that, this receiver room, this quarterback, like, they'll be able to carry the team as long as they need to.
Yeah, and I hate to keep banging on the offensive line because I do think they, there has been games where they could have played better for the run game. I think the running backs are talented. Like you said, they're young. They're all going to be back. At least they should all be back. I could maybe see like Cartavius or Eli wanting to transfer out, but I mean, you have an awesome young running back in Abu Sama who, has just had these games where, he can, I mean, Jared Hufford said it the best, when you can, set your block and then see your running back zip right past you. He's had a lot of games like that and a lot of plays like that. So, I'm looking forward to see what Abu Sama can do. But again, it's just all in just developing this young offense that does have veterans on the team. These guys they have another year under their belt as starters. And I think going into next year, this is going to be one of the most improved offenses in the Big 12.
I know we've been calling for more Abu Saba rushes, and we actually saw him lead the team in carries against Texas, which only amounted to 11 yards.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Sama's a true freshman going up against some, like, actual men on the defensive line. So I'm not going to, count this game against him. But I think we'll see more into these next couple weeks as, they go to play a K-State team that is, not as large as Texas, and they go to a bowl game, which will add just more experience to this already young team.
Yeah, and I mean, he was getting swallowed up on some of those runs up the middle, and he couldn't really go anywhere. But yeah, I mean, you really want to still see that progression. We talked a lot about next year, but you still have 2 games to keep progressing. And if you can have a decent game against Kansas State, you don't exactly need to win, but if you can just go into the bowl game, as still probably like finishing as 4th or 5th in the Big 12 as opposed to where most had you as last, I think it's a big confidence booster going into whoever they are really going to play, which seems like at least going to have some equal competition from the projections that I've seen.
And before we move on from Texas, I think the last thing I wanted to point out was just the defense. It seemed like, at time, I mean, 26 points isn't a lot to give up to Texas of all teams, but it did seem like at times like they were not going to stop drives, especially in that second half there. I mean, they had a really good performance in the first half, but it was that second half where you were like, oh, this Texas team is just going to score in every possession.
Yeah, and I mean, you're going to see that because they have some dudes up there on offense, especially from, Quinn Ewers and that pair of wide receivers, and also that running back who he was starting at the year and he just stepped right into that role, and they got some huge plays on them, especially in that second half.
Yeah, so I don't think it's like a concern going forward. It's just, it does seem like against good teams, maybe the defense will slip a bit. So speaking of the defense having tough times dealing with good teams, Iowa State is in for another good team as they go to take on Kansas State on the road to end the season.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the roster from top to bottom, their quarterback, Will Howard, I mean, he's just been playing really solid football. I mean, he's a veteran, so that's what you kind of want to see. 23 touchdowns to 9 picks, and then an amazing running game, and I mean amazing. They have 4 guys that are averaging over 4.5 yards per carry and 3 that are averaging over 5 yards per carry. I think, I mean, that's just crazy. Iowa State has done pretty well against the run, but they're going to have their hands full with this Kansas State team who, has proven themselves as one of the better teams in the Big 12, and I think they still have a chance to make the Big 12 championship game. I'm not entirely sure about it, but I mean, they're going to want a good statement win so that they can possibly even get a New Year's Six bowl, because like I said, they've had some really solid wins this year.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about the run game. That was kind of their big thing last year too, which is why they did in the end, win the Big 12.
Yeah.
And yes, they sent some of their running backs on to the next level, but it really has seemed like the run game has not taken a step back, which is kind of scary for Iowa State.
Yeah, and you heard me talk about Will Howard. I mean, he's just been playing really solid football, and that's kind of all they need to complement that run game. I'm going to look at their receivers here. Yeah, 2 receivers with 500 yards. They have just really, literally like a carbon copy of each other. They both have over 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. So Phillip Brooks and Ben Sinnott, a tight end, they're going to be some big guys for Kansas State or for Iowa State to watch out for in this Farmageddon matchup in Manhattan, which we will be on site for.
Mm-hmm. I think, you talk about Farmageddon. The big thing in the press conference before this game was this rivalry. I mean, this is like one of Iowa State's biggest rivalries too, is this Kansas State game. And with realignment, with everything, with new teams coming in, the Big 12 being too big to have everybody play each other every year. I think this being one of the unprotected rivalries, this is going to be maybe more important than ever, because this may be one of the last times we see it be just like a every year type deal.
Yeah, and this is also another game that Iowa State was really, just like in the Texas game last season, they were really close to winning this. And this game was at home last year, and they only lost by 1. I was at the game. Very frustrating game for Iowa State to just put up 9 points. You hold your opponent to 10 points and you still lose. It was just kind of crazy to me. And that's when they had Adrian Martinez, I believe his name was, who I think's honestly a better quarterback than Will Howard. I mean, he definitely, has a different mobility and being able to use his legs and whatnot. So, I don't know if Iowa State is going to win this match, but I think it's definitely an easier matchup than Texas. But I think this is going to be one where the defense really does have to come back and step up, because just kind of like Iowa State, they've always just kind of lived on their defense, especially these last couple of years. And if they can get solid play again out of Rocco, and I'm going to already say I don't think the run game's going to work because it just hasn't really at all this year. You can't really count on it. But this is definitely going to be a game where the defense is going to need to step up on the road, which they have been doing they've been doing a pretty good job of recently against, BYU and Cincy and Baylor and whatnot.
Yeah. I think this will be a much different beast, though, than those teams.
Yeah, for sure.
The biggest thing that I'm concerned about with them matching up with Kansas State is that Kansas State has not lost to a bad team this year. I mean, I looked at their 3 losses, and they lost to Texas at Texas.
Yep.
They lost to Oklahoma State in Stillwater, which I'm on the train that nobody wins in Stillwater.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see it this week. I think Oklahoma State's going to end the season on a win. And then they lost to Missouri, a top 10 team
who's been playing really well. At
Missouri.
Yeah, and then now that I'm looking at it, they're undefeated at home this season. Yeah. So that's and
they most recently just beat Kansas, another ranked team, at Kansas.
Yeah. And they played a much better game than Iowa State did against them. So it's definitely I don't really know if this is a very winnable game I think it's a winnable game, but I just don't see Iowa State pulling out a win here. But I don't know if I said it on this podcast or I've just said it to you. I think the highest probability was that, a lot of people said that the highest probability for these last 2 games is that Iowa State loses both. I'm on the train that I think that they would at least split one. If you beat Texas, you ride into Kansas State, you're a little high on the momentum, and then you end up losing to them. I think, after this loss against Texas, they're going to want to go out and prove themselves. They have that bowl game, so just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. I'm just getting the vibes that maybe they do have a high chance of pulling this win out, but if I had to predict it right now, I would predict a win for the Wildcats at home.
Yeah, Iowa State, honestly, is probably going to be the best team they've played at home this season, so I mean, yes, they're undefeated at home, but they haven't really played elite Big 12 competition at home. But, you know, everything aside, I think we've seen how Iowa State matches up against these ranked teams. We saw how they handled Oklahoma. We saw how they handled Kansas. Now we've seen how they've handled Texas. I mean, 2 of those were losses at home where we saw how they went to Oklahoma and what happened there. I think you've seen that this team is obviously not a bottom team in the Big 12. You know, I think they're kind of around the middle of the pack, but I don't know how well they can match up against some of the top teams like Kansas State.
And, you know, you have these opportunities to beat these top 25 teams. And, you know, I was saying a couple times for the Texas game that I think a win against Texas is a little bit ahead of schedule, even though it is at home. And you know, I think we've seen all we're going to get out of this team this year. I don't think you're going to see major improvements in the last game of the regular season or, you know, in the bowl game. If anything, it would be in the bowl game. You have that more time to rest and think about, you know, what you want to do differently. But I think they're really just going to have to, like I said, go in there, maybe try some new things. But ultimately, they do have to stick to what has been working, and that has been trusting your defense when you need to. And, you know, trusting the arm of Rocco Becht. I think the big thing in those losses has been second half defense. You saw it a lot in Oklahoma. You saw it a lot in the Texas game and a little bit in the Kansas game as well. So, you know, if they can step up in this last top 25 matchup for them, you know, maybe they can turn things around if the offense is working. But like I said, I don't think you were going to see anything majorly different in this that we haven't been seeing all season.
Until the bowl game, which, I mean, we can talk about now.
Yeah.
Obviously, Iowa State missing the bowl last year with their one conference win. But this season, I mean, they are set to, you know, probably finish with a 6-win and then make it to a bowl. But there was a chance they get that 7th win and, you know, face a tougher opponent. I guess, what would be the best outcome for them? Should they get that 7th win and just get better experience, or get the 6th win just to get some, you know, good reps against a team that might be more beatable?
You know, I think for them moving forward, I have, you know, like I said earlier, I think they're ahead of schedule in terms of where this team was at the beginning of the year and the expectations and whatnot. So I think getting that 7th win, or are you talking about getting the 7th win in the bowl game? Or against
Kansas State.
Okay.
Going into the bowl game.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, getting that, I think it'd be great because it'd be a top 25 matchup on the road, and you would be able to ride that into, you know, into your bowl game, which you have a couple weeks of rest for. I think that, you know, that'd be the ideal situation just to end the regular season 7-5. 7-5. But I think what's most likely to happen, and probably what's best for this team, is getting that 7th win in the bowl game. Yeah, I think that's probably likely. And, you know, if you end 6-6 at the end of the year, you end 6-6 after you lost on the road to Ohio. You got embarrassed by Oklahoma on the road. I think the best thing that's happened for this Iowa State team was that stretch where they go on the road and beat Cincinnati, Baylor, come back home, and gosh, what was the home game after that?
They had
they had the bye week, and then they had Kansas, or they had a bye week somewhere in there. But I think that best stretch was winning those 2 conference games on the road, and that's kind of what really put into my mind that this team is ahead of schedule. I know it's against Baylor and Cincinnati, not, you know, great opponents, but you still have a lot of I mean, this is a tight race at the end of regular season for the Big 12 title, with some teams like Oklahoma State, that, you know, a team that Iowa State has beat, and, you know, teams like Texas and Kansas, where Iowa State really kind of, you know, I wouldn't say pushed their luck, but, you know, they gave them a fight. So I think asking for a big win from them would be a little bit too much. But more of the story, I'll stop on this large ramble, but I think it's most likely that they get that 7th win in that bowl game.
Yeah, and I think right now a lot of bowl predictions are most likely predicting them to finish at 6 wins. So a lot of their opponents that they're being predicted to face in the bowl games are going to be, you know, fellow 6-win teams, teams that might be a better matchup for a young team, because it would be good to go out on a high note, especially after having so many low notes this season. Maybe not as many as last season, but I think a young team would maybe benefit from having a somewhat easier opponent to finish out the season, especially with the extra practices after this Kansas State game going into the bowl game. There's still a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah. And you have your, who you're going to play. So yeah, because who you're going to play. You have those extra practices like you talked about. So it's basically like you have probably 3 weeks to prepare, maybe, or 2-3 weeks, whatever it is.
15 practices. That's all we were told.
15 practices is, it's basically like getting ready for your season opener, because you can scout that team. And it's like preparing for your season opener, but you have a whole season of film to look at from that team that you're going to go up against. And, it's for the same thing that, for whoever Iowa State does end up playing. But I think it would help them out if they play like a middle of the pack team in like the SEC or maybe the Pac-12 conferences that are kind of at a lower point this year, more so in the SEC. This is kind of a off year for that conference. But, I think some of the matchups we've seen in Louisiana for Vegas, if we go, that'd be a little warm weather for us, which we're not really accustomed to in Iowa in December. But I just think really them getting that bowl game, being bowl eligible is, putting them ahead of schedule, especially for, like you said, a young team in Iowa State.
Mm-hmm. I think that's probably the biggest thing is this game is just going to be just more experience. And I think that's really what they need. We've seen how they've been throughout the season. We've seen a lot of youth. This team last season was also really young. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of mistakes, which is a big part in why they struggled so much. What we've seen now is some of the players transfer over or transition into this next year and take another step forward. We've seen more young players get in there and develop, and I think it's just the whole season has just been about growth and development, and the bowl game is just going to be more of that.
Yeah, and this has been a growing season. In a growing season, you make a bowl game. And you finish as, in the last 3 weeks of the season, you were in it for the Big 12 race. I think you can put your hat on and say that this has been a great season. If it ended right now, if you tell me they lose against Kansas State, they end 6-6, and then, I think right there, that's awesome for them in the regular season. And then going into that bowl game, I think you got to just play your heart out, because, it's just going to be some random bowl game. We know that. And if you go out there and get that win, you get a win in a rebuilding you get a win in a bowl game during a rebuilding season where you have a lot of guys coming back next year. Again, you just have Iowa State looking like they are going to be one of the better teams going into next year, considering how many starters should be coming back and have that extra year under their belt.
Yeah, they've way exceeded expectations. Moving on from football, let's talk a little bit about basketball, because they've got a big week coming up. Thanksgiving, they've got their tournament, the ESPN Invitational. I guess we've talked about it a little bit on the Daily Dish. What have we seen so far, especially with their most recent game going into this tournament?
Yeah, this actually is an interesting stat of the week. So, Iowa State scored over 90 points for the second time this season. That is for the second time this season. In the first 2 years of TJ coaching Iowa State, they had never scored over 90 points, even in non-conference games. I hope that stat's correct. I hope I did my math correctly and looked at the scores correctly, but I'm pretty sure that this has to be the best offense under TJ Altsberger. The first 2 times that they've scored over 90 points since he's been here, and they have not played the greatest teams in non-conference play. So to be able to do that, put up the amount of points that you do, I know, it's non-conference opponents, but yeah, over 90 points. That's amazing. And they're actually 14th, I think, in the country for points per game, which is at 91 right now, I want to say.
And to go along with that, against Grambling State, their halftime lead was the biggest halftime lead in the TJ Otzelberger era.
Oh, wow.
So this team, offensively has been putting it together, and obviously defensively, but against kind of not insanely good competition.
And I think TJ's kind of talked about that a little bit. Like, the emphasis on defense is always going to be there, but I think with the amount of talent that they have in guys like you see Omaha rising and Taman Lipsey's gotten better, and then guys that have transferred in like Keyshawn and Curtis. I think Curtis Jones needs to just keep shooting because his shot is going to get there. And we saw it a little bit in these last 2 games, but I think he has the most 3-point attempts on the team, and he's only made like 8, I think, or like 6 or 8, but just keep shooting because with how he was at Buffalo, they're going to need him in some spots to be that 3-point shooter when maybe Milan's not doing so well, and you can't always really rely on Taman to hit a big shot like that too.
I like that you mentioned Curtis because I just looked at his stats today, and every game he has been improving, like quite a bit. Because, I mean, his last 2 games, he's put up 14 in each, so I guess he's averaging 14 a game in the last 2. But his last game was his most efficient. He had 5 assists in the last game, and he's been getting a good amount of steals in each game. His against Lindenwood, he had 5, and then against Grambling State, he had 3.
Yeah.
He's just kind of like filling out the stat sheet, which is good for a player that is coming off the bench.
Yeah.
And, he was second in scoring. He was tied with Omaha, and both those players were coming off the bench in that game.
And you're going to need it because, and I know Curtis Jones is a guard, but you're going to need all the bench depth you can get with Hassan Ward being out for the rest of non-conference play at least. So, when you're going to see guys like Curtis Jones get more time, Demarion Watson, we saw Jackson Paveleski play in that first half. Omaha's getting better. I think Rob Jones is probably going to cement himself in that starting role, at least for now. But yeah, I mean, they really just responded well to Hassan Ward not being available for that game, and I think they're going to be able to continue to do that. And we're going to see that in this first game against VCU. We're recording this on Wednesday, so tomorrow.
Yeah, and not even in this first game, but just the next possibly 3 games, I guess. We probably shouldn't ink them into the finals yet, just in cement, but there is a good chance they do make the finals.
Yeah, just scouting these teams. I mean, VCU hasn't been great. It's and then if they win that game, it'll be against either Boise State or Virginia Tech, which again, I just think what's really going to carry this team is that defense, and Iowa State's going to, they're going to punch you in the mouth defensively, hold you to make 50, 60 points, which in other years wouldn't have been great with the TJ Altsberger team because these past 2 years they've sometimes struggled to even score 60 points.
Yeah.
But now, and I know, like I said earlier, they're averaging 90 points. I don't think they're going to stay at that, but I think they will be sitting at that mid-70s range by the end of the season.
Yeah, and I think there are a good amount of teams in this tournament that will also be sitting in that mid-70s range. So if I guess Iowa State can keep them under that, maybe in that 50, 60 range, there's a good chance that they could come out on top in every single one of these matchups.
And I texted you the other day, at least it was at one point, it was on, I think it was yesterday actually, Iowa State had the best defensive scoring. They've averaged 41 points, I believe it was, allowed. And I know, again, this is against non-conference teams, but okay, let's say in conference play or against Power 5 schools, you add maybe 10, 15 points. You hold people to under 60 points. I mean, that's just, that's incredible. And I think that's definitely what's going to carry them in this tournament. And like you said, you don't want to pencil them in that second and third round. You want to see them play a good game, just take it game by game. But I think with the amount of competition that they have on this side of the bracket, you could easily see them going up against FAU or Texas A&M on the other side of the bracket in that championship game on Sunday.
And then we talk about the possible matchups and the possible tough matchups. I think for me, in that finals game, if they make it there, I think there's a good chance they are sitting across from Texas A&M.
Yep.
And I think that is going to be a pretty tough team to match up with. I mean, they're top 15 at this point. I mean, they have more size than Iowa State does. They're a team that can get to the free throw line a lot, which is something that is a little concerning for Iowa State, who at this point has had some of their, I guess, like better players or maybe more hyped players like Omaha run into foul trouble. I think the biggest thing is that although Texas A&M isn't great from three, they are really good in the paint, which has been kind of Iowa State's bread and butter this year.
Yeah, and I've talked about this. I just love that college basketball is back, and I think this is really when you're going to see what this Iowa State team is made of. You're 4-0 against, non-conference teams at home. Great. This is where you should be. Now, this is where you can start to prove yourself, cement yourself, maybe get into the top 25 after this weekend. We'll see what happens. And over on the women's side, too, I'm excited for their matchups that they have. But really, you're going to see what these teams are made of. I think you saw that in the women's game against Drake, where just spots that they need to improve. And I think they did improve on those spots in the game against Southern. But overall, these tournaments for both teams, you're going to see what they're made of. You're going to see what the bench is made of, what these new starting lineups, what they can do against Power 5 teams. And overall, you're just playing games back to back to back. If Iowa State men's, they make it all the way to the championship, they played 3 games in 3 days against some very tough competition. So I'm just really looking forward to this game on Thursday. Gonna maybe enjoy some turkey, some ham, and definitely my favorite side of, green bean casserole if it's there. Just gonna be sitting down and watching these games of flowing, and especially all the other games that have been going on in these tournaments. That's been very exciting. But back to Iowa State, definitely going to be some great games these next couple of days.
And speaking of turkey, this just in, Rocco Becht was asked at the press conference his favorite Thanksgiving meal.
Okay.
And he said...
Oh, can I guess?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so he's from Florida. Let's see here. I feel like I'm going to have to rule out some vegetables. I don't really know why, but I just feel like I have to. So like green bean casserole and like corn. That's not traditionally a side dish, but I typically have it at my Thanksgivings. I'm going to say that is it like a traditional one or is it like a weird one? Okay. Yep. I'm going to say mashed potatoes and gravy. I feel like that's a safe option.
He actually did not talk about mash. His favorite is stuffing.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Good pick.
I can respect that. It's not exactly my favorite, but if I'm looking at my ideal plate, I've got a little bit of turkey there. I've got a decent amount of ham there, big ham guy, a roll, some mashed potatoes and gravy, maybe some green beans if it's there, and then, I'll throw some stuffing on there.
Yeah, and the one thing that Rocco did say is big ham eater. Loves his ham at Thanksgiving. Does not like turkey. He said even gravy cannot save turkey.
Ooh.
It's too dry, which I agree with him there.
I do agree, but I was talking with our visuals editor, Jacob, before we started filming, and I said that you got to be polite wherever you go, and you got to get yourself a little bit of turkey because there's someone
That's true.
Wherever you went, maybe your mom brought it, maybe you're going to your aunt's house, maybe you're going to someone's house that you don't exactly really know that well. Someone slaved over that turkey and kept an eye on it for at least a quarter of the day. So you got to be at least nice. Take a little bit of the turkey. The turkey to ham ratio for me is always favored by the ham. But guys, if you're listening to this, maybe on Thursday before you start, maybe during your turkey trot or, during your backyard game of football before the meal's done, just get yourself some turkey because I promise you, you're going to make someone's day that slaved over that thing for about 4 to 5 hours.
And if you make a turkey right, it does taste pretty good.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you just got to make sure it's not dry. It's got a little bit of flavor in there. I don't know if Rocco, if him saying that gravy can't save it. I think gravy can make it a little bit better, but you got to get yourself a little bit of turkey on there. I mean, it's the tradition. When are you ever having turkey unless it's like a turkey sandwich or something? You got to enjoy it for the holiday. I mean, it's like going to Christmas and not maybe eating some candy canes or something.
Yeah, it's the one day of the year you should be eating turkey.
Oh, yeah. I'm filling myself up with at least 2 plates tomorrow. And no shame at all because it's a day made for eating and enjoying the people that you are around with and being thankful. And I'm thankful for my co-host over here, Christian. And I hope you have a great Thanksgiving.
I'm thankful for you, too. So I guess that's all we got for this week. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. And we will see you next week to wrap up the football season.
Go Cowboys.